Why was she even here? That was the thought that burned through Lyra Vance's mind every time the jeers came, every time the laughter clattered against steel and echoed down the decks of the USS Horizon. She told herself it didn't matter, that she could stay quiet, keep her head low, keep fastening straps to missiles like a nameless hand in the machine. But silence never made the noise stop. "Don't touch that, Vance. Leave the real weapons to real sailors." The voice cut like steel on steel, followed by the stomp of boots, laughter bouncing off the deck. She tightened the straps on the Tomahawk missile, her fingers steady even as her jaw clenched. "Pretend you don't hear them. Pretend you're just another mechanic. Pretend you belong." But belonging was a word that had never come easy. She pulled another latch, heard the sharp click of metal giving way, and then came the sound that didn't belong. A snap, high and violent, like a gunshot at close range. The cable tore loose. The missile shuddered, 30 feet of steel swinging free, its tail veering toward the frozen crewman standing too close. For one breath, time fractured, boots rooted in place, eyes wide, a silence that wasn't silence at all but the paralysis of fear. Lyra moved before thought caught up. Her body lunged forward, shoulder slamming into the man's chest, wrenching him clear just as the missile's arc sliced the air where he had been standing. The world groaned as the weapon swung wide, cables screeching against their anchors. She shoved the man to the bulkhead, threw her weight against the trembling frame, and jammed a locking pin into the cradle. Metal bit back. Pain shot through her arms, but the missile stopped, quivering like a beast barely restrained. The deck held its breath, and in that breath her sleeve slipped. Sunlight struck it, a patch, worn and faded but unmistakable, red and black, angular, jagged, an emblem that didn't belong on any logistics sailor's uniform. A fragment of cloth heavier than the warhead it accompanied. Silence spread across the deck, heavier than any laughter had ever been. The man she'd saved lay against the bulkhead, chest heaving, his eyes darting not to the missile, not to the cable, but to her arm. Around him, the men who had mocked her seconds earlier stared as if the ocean itself had shifted course. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Every sailor there knew what they'd seen. The whispers came like sparks in dry grass, specter division. Some said it under their breath, afraid of the sound of their own voices. Others mouthed it without daring to let sound out. A name not meant to be spoken, a ghost unit whispered about in training halls but never written on paper. A story no one could confirm, because official records said it had never existed. Lyra tugged her jacket back into place, covering the patch, but it was too late. The emblem was already burned into memory. The officer of the watch barked orders, his voice faltering but loud enough to break the paralysis. "Damage control, secure that line, get those cables fastened." Men scrambled, clamps slammed shut, boots hammered against steel as sailors found rhythm again, but the rhythm was broken. Every motion circled around her, every breath passed through the silence she left in her wake. She said nothing. She went back to the missile cradle, her hands brushing over bolts and levers with a familiarity no logistics manual had ever taught. Movements stripped of hesitation, as if she had done this 100 times before, on ships that never returned to port, on decks where witnesses never spoke again. The sailor she'd saved climbed unsteadily to his feet. His face was pale, sweat dampening his collar. His lips trembled, unsure whether to thank her or to fear her. His eyes searched the others for guidance, but none came. Above them, Admiral Hale descended from the command platform. He did not hurry. He didn't need to. His presence was weight enough. Years of salt and iron had carved him into something immovable, a man who carried oceans in his stride. His storm eyes scanned the deck but stopped only on her arm. When he reached her, Lyra straightened, not in crisp salute, not in subordination, but in a stance that said she would not yield ground. "You secured the ordnance," Hale said. His voice was even, controlled. "Yes, sir." No pride, no apology, just the truth. And that patch, his eyes narrowed, where did you acquire it? The question fell like a blade between them. A murmur rippled through the crew. No one wanted to answer it. Everyone wanted to hear it. Lyra didn't speak. She tightened the last clamp on the cradle, then stepped back, silence pressed to her lips like steel. Not defiance, something sharper, a refusal to acknowledge the question itself. The Admiral studied her, his silence louder than any reprimand. At last he spoke to the others, his words curt, his eyes never leaving hers. "Resume your stations." The sailors scattered reluctantly. Some moved with forced noise, banging clamps and shouting over each other as though volume could drown out unease. Others worked too quietly, afraid to be seen, afraid to be too near her. Lyra wiped sweat from her brow, her hands steady but her chest tight. Beneath the clatter of tools and the bark of orders, she heard only the hollow ring of memory. The way her body had reacted when the cable snapped. It wasn't instinct, not in the ordinary sense. It was training. Training no one here should know she had ever received. She thought she had buried it, but the world had a way of ripping open what you tried hardest to keep hidden. Above them the Mediterranean sky stretched wide and blue, calm, deceptively calm. And on the deck of the Horizon, that calm was gone. The men who had mocked her now stole glances when they thought she wouldn't notice. Respect didn't live in their silence. Caution did, and beneath caution, fear. Because storms and shells they understood, but not the unknown. And Lyra Vance was the unknown. Admiral Hale lingered at the rail above, speaking low with his aides. Their faces pale, their eyes flickering back to her again and again. He had seen everything. He knew what he had seen. He would not forget. And neither would she. Hours passed, but the aftershock never faded. The missile sat steady in its cradle, every cable taut, every pin locked. The ship carried on across the endless blue, but the rhythm was not the same. Something had shifted, and all of them knew it. Who exactly was Lyra Vance? She did not intend to answer, not yet. But the ocean has a way of forcing truths to the surface. The klaxon shattered the silence. A howl ripped across the deck, urgent, jagged, nothing like the controlled wail of a drill. Red lights stuttered against bulkheads, painting faces in crimson, casting shadows like blood. Hostile launch detected, bearing east, closing fast. The voice over the loudspeakers cracked with urgency. The crew froze, only for a heartbeat. Then instinct shoved them into motion. Boots slammed. Officers barked orders. Hatches groaned open, steel tubes waiting to breathe fire. But then came the words that cracked the rhythm again. Tube 3 malfunction. Load sequence frozen. The panic spread instantly. Without that tube, their counterstrike would be crippled. The enemy's missile would reach them long before help could arrive. Lyra's chest tightened. She knew that failure, knew it from places she had never spoken of, from nights when silence was ordered and survival was not. She could still hear the voices of instructors drilling into her: valve, switch, reset, prime. She closed her eyes, just for a moment. Then she stepped forward. "Vance, stay clear," an officer shouted, his voice cracked. "This isn't your station." But she didn't stop. The engineers clustered at the console parted instinctively, as though some part of them already knew. Her hands moved over the control bank, not guessing, not fumbling. Every switch, every seal, every lever, she touched them like old acquaintances. "Valve switch, reset, prime." Her voice was low, steady, an incantation whispered only for herself. The lights flickered, amber blinked, then green. The hydraulics groaned, pressure bleeding through the jammed lines. The arm locked into place. "System reset complete," she said, her voice calm as still water. Silence stretched. Then the officer of the battery roared, "Cycle complete, launch authorized." The missile screamed, free white contrail cutting the sky, chasing the unseen threat beyond the horizon. Relief erupted, a cheer, ragged but real. Yet beneath it, heavier silence pressed in again, because everyone had seen, everyone had watched her move like she belonged to shadows they couldn't name. On the bridge, Admiral Hale's silhouette was rigid, his eyes never leaving her. He alone knew what it meant. Lyra didn't watch the missile streak into the distance. She turned instead to the sailor she had saved earlier. He was pale still, his eyes locked on her with a question unspoken, burning sharper than gratitude. "Who are you?" She gave no answer. She simply pulled her sleeve higher, covering the patch. But concealment no longer mattered. The truth had already taken root. And it was spreading. What made her hands move that way? That was the thought clinging to every sailor who had seen it. It wasn't luck, wasn't improvisation. The way she had bypassed the jammed sequence was too precise, like someone following steps written in a book they were never supposed to have read. On the bridge, Admiral Hale leaned forward against the glass, his gaze locked on her. His officers chattered around him, shouting reports, but he barely heard them. He had seen her hands. He had seen the ease, the certainty, and he knew. Lyra Vance wasn't who she claimed to be. The intercom crackled again. Enemy projectile neutralized. Intercept successful. The words brought the deck alive. Boots stomped, men clapped backs, relief bursting in nervous laughter. They had survived, for now. But amid the celebration, a quiet weight wrapped itself around Lyra. The sailors closest to her didn't cheer. They only stared, as if waiting for her sleeve to slip again. Admiral Hale descended once more, his posture heavy with command, his steps deliberate. The crew instinctively cleared a circle around him and her. Silence fell like a curtain, broken only by the wind scraping across steel. "You knew what you were doing," Hale said, his voice low, a blade tucked beneath his tone. "I did what was necessary." Her voice was even calm. The Admiral's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the sealed hatches where smoke still drifted, then back to her. "That was not training issued to you here. Those aren't procedures you pick up from manuals." Her silence was answer enough. The officer of the watch stepped forward, handing Hale a data slate. Diagnostic logs streamed across the screen, every switch, every valve she had touched. Irrefutable. Hale dismissed the officer with a flick of his wrist. His eyes returned to her, sharp and merciless. "Spectre Division," he said, his voice carrying just enough for the crew to hear. "You carry its mark, and now you demonstrate its hand." The name hung in the air like smoke. Some of the younger sailors frowned, uncomprehending, but the older ones stiffened, trading looks sharp with recognition. Rumors they had dismissed in training halls now stood living before them. Lyra's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned back to the launcher, her hands running along a valve that didn't need checking, anything to avoid the weight of his words. "Answer me," Hale pressed. She finally met his gaze. "What would you have me say, Admiral? That I've seen things I should, that I know patterns that don't exist? Would it make a difference?" The Admiral's composure faltered for just a breath. Something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, recognition. He had seen it before. The circle of sailors tightened unconsciously, every ear leaning toward them. The tension bent the air itself. "That program," Hale said at last, his voice low but audible, "was buried for a reason. No records, no survivors." His eyes dipped toward her covered arm. "Yet here you stand." Lyra did not answer. Her silence cut deeper than denial ever could. The sailors shifted uneasily. To them, this was no longer a logistics worker mocked at the loading bay. She was something else entirely. And if their admiral refused to explain, then every unanswered question would only burn hotter. A young sailor blurted, his voice cracking, "Sir, what is Spectre Division?" The word struck like a spark in dry grass. Hale's eyes cut to the man, silencing him without raising his voice. "It's nothing you need to know." But the damage was done. The crew had tasted blood in the water, and curiosity never retreated. "Return to your duties," Hale barked, louder now, snapping the moment in two. The sailors scattered reluctantly, though their glances lingered. Their hands moved with drills and duties, but their minds stayed locked on the woman with the hidden patch. Hale turned sharply. "Walk with me." He didn't wait for her reply. He strode toward the shadow of the superstructure. Lyra followed, her boots striking in rhythm with his, the air between them taut as wire. The noise of the deck faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of engines within the corridors. Steel walls pressed close. Hale stopped at last, pivoting to face her beneath flickering lights. "You forced my hand," he said. "The crew has seen too much." "I didn't ask for this," she replied. "I tried to stay quiet, but when steel snaps and lives hang in balance, silence isn't an option." He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a growl. "You think I don't recognize the way you moved out there? I signed the order to dissolve that unit. I read every line of the reports. They said no one survived, and yet here you are." Her composure cracked, only for a moment. The shadow of a memory passed across her face, but she straightened quickly, her voice steady again. "Then you already know enough. Leave it there." The Admiral studied her, searching for cracks, but she gave him nothing more. At last he exhaled, long and heavy. "We are not finished, but for now your skill saved this ship. That is the only reason you're not confined." Lyra inclined her head, not gratitude. He straightened. "Return to your post, but know this, every eye aboard is on you, and so are mine." He turned and strode away, leaving her in the corridor with only the hum of engines and the echo of ghosts. She leaned briefly against the bulkhead, closing her eyes. Memory clawed its way back. Instructors shouting in blackened halls, missions erased before they began, names never spoken aloud. She had thought she had buried it, but the grave was shallow, and the past had teeth. When she stepped back onto the deck, every conversation faltered. No one spoke to her, but the weight of their stares pressed in from all sides. Respect, suspicion, fear, they couldn't decide which outweighed the other. Above them, Admiral Hale stood at the rail, eyes locked on her like a hawk. The sea lay deceptively calm. Silver waves stretched in every direction, but everyone aboard knew calm seas meant nothing, not when storms were already inside the ship. The alarm wailed again. This time deeper, steadier, the unmistakable voice of war. Multiple launches detected, inbound strike package, impact window closing fast. The deck exploded into motion. Sailors sprinted to stations. Covers flew off guns. Magazines roared as shells slammed into place. Engineers sealed hatches and braced bulkheads. The Horizon became a living machine again, but its pulse was jagged, erratic. One missile had been terror enough. Now there were several. Lyra moved with the tide, her body slipping into rhythm without needing orders. She had lived this before. Different seas, different uniforms, the same chaos. Hale's voice rolled over the intercom, steady and unflinching. "Prepare for counter-launch. All batteries hot." The words steadied the crew, but beneath the surface, panic gnawed at discipline. Could they survive another storm, or had their luck already burned out? The first salvo of Tomahawks primed, tubes shuddering as hydraulics hissed. Steel woke, fire waited. Then another blow fell. "System fault, battery 2 offline." The shout cracked through the air. Engineers swarmed the console, faces pale, eyes wide at the error codes flooding the panels. Wires hissed, sparks spitting. Panic crawled through the ranks. Lyra's stomach knotted, different fault but the same handwriting. She recognized the shudder, the pitch of hydraulics whining wrong. A seal cracked deep inside the system, not coincidence, sabotage. She stayed still at first, Hale's warning echoing in her mind. Every eye aboard is on you. To intervene again would tighten the noose around her neck. But then the intercom blared. Impact window 5 minutes. 5 minutes, enough to end them. Her body moved before doubt could anchor it. She shoved past a petty officer, her voice sharp as iron. "Clear this station." The officer hesitated, then obeyed. She dropped to her knees by the panel, her hands flying across levers and gauges. The pressure was gone. Dead. She rerouted auxiliary lines, bypassing the main feed. A trick never taught to naval engineers. A trick whispered only in the black halls of Spectre Division. A wrench appeared at her side. The same petty officer she'd shoved. He didn't speak, just held it out, his face pale. She took it, spun open a valve, hissed steam bleeding free. Then she locked the regulator in place with a slam of metal. The gauges climbed, red to amber, amber to green. "System stabilized," she called. Relief cracked across the deck like thunder. Hale's voice cut it off. "Focus on the launch, fire now." The tubes roared. The missiles screamed skyward, fire and smoke clawing at the heavens. Lyra staggered back, chest heaving. She felt their eyes on her again, heavier than before. Not just awe, not just fear, but something worse, trust. On the bridge, Admiral Hale gripped the rail until his knuckles blanched. He had watched every move, every decision. He knew what it meant. She wasn't improvising, she was commanding. And if the crew began to see her that way, then the ship itself could fracture. The intercom blared again. "Enemy strike package intercepted, all targets destroyed." Cheers erupted, applause rippled, but beneath it all the silence still grew. Because twice now, survival had not come from procedure, not from training, not from manuals. It had come from her. Lyra Vance, the ghost who should not exist. How many times could she save them before the questions tore her apart? That was the thought that trailed Lyra Vance as she walked the deck, her boots heavy against steel. She had intervened twice, twice too many, and the more she acted, the more they stared. Whispers clung to every corner. She moved like she's done it before. That wasn't in the manual. Spectre, it has to be. No one said it to her face, but the silence carried it just the same. Lyra kept her eyes forward, her hands busy with clamps and checks that didn't need doing. Pretending normalcy was easier than acknowledging what had already unraveled. Her sleeve was torn now, the patch hidden but not forgotten. She could feel the memory of it in every glance, as if the cloth still burned like an ember against her skin. Above, Admiral Hale watched from the rail. He had not left his post. He did not need to. His gaze was anchor enough, pinning her in place no matter where she moved. The sea shimmered deceptively calm around them. Sunlight fractured against silver waves. To anyone looking from the outside, the horizon was just another vessel cutting across the Mediterranean. But aboard, the calm was gone. Because survival had not come from drills or chain of command. It had come from her. And that truth frightened them more than enemy fire. The alarm wailed again. This time it wasn't missiles. Multiple surface contacts detected, hostile vessels closing fast. The words landed like lead. Sailors stiffened, their throats dry, their eyes wide. A missile strike was terror enough, but ships closing meant confrontation could not be dodged. It meant war, up close, steel against steel, cannons against flesh. Admiral Hale's voice thundered across the deck. "Battle stations, all guns hot, prepare for surface engagement." The deck erupted, tarps ripped away from cannons. Shells thundered into magazines. Hydraulics groaned as turrets lifted their heavy throats skyward. The hum of engines deepened, vibrating steel like the heartbeat of something alive and waiting for blood. Lyra moved with the tide of bodies, blending into motion without hesitation. She didn't need to ask what was happening. She had lived this rhythm before. The pace, the tone, the way voices pitched just slightly higher when death drew close. And then came the crack. Secondary battery offline, power relay dead. The shout sliced through the deck. Heads turned, faces pale. The secondary guns were vital for close-range defense. Without them, the Horizon would have to rely on the primaries alone, too slow to repel fast craft swarming in. Technicians scrambled for the relay housing. Panels tore open, sparks spat, wires hissed. The acrid stench of burnt insulation bit the air. Lyra's fists clenched. She had seen this before, not in training, not in manuals, but in the shadows of missions that never made it home. Redundancy fails when sabotage is precise. This wasn't accident. This was intention. She forced herself to stay still. Hale's warning echoed in her head. Every eye aboard is on you. But then came the words that broke hesitation. Impact window 10 minutes. Not enough time. Not with green engineers fumbling at fried wires, their hands trembling, their tools clattering to the deck. She pushed forward. Back up, she ordered, her voice sharp as iron. The startled engineers froze, then shifted aside. Her hands ripped through the mess of wiring, her eyes cutting through the chaos. She saw it instantly. A bypass scorched deliberately, a line fried from within. She yanked a glove from her pocket, grabbed a pair of cutters, and set to work. Stripping, splicing, reattaching in a sequence no naval tech was ever supposed to know. Not a repair, a rewrite. "Don't," one of the engineers started. Then he stopped, because he saw the precision. She wasn't guessing. She wasn't improvising. She was performing something practiced, something ingrained deeper than instinct. A hum shivered through the panel, lights flickered, then steadied green. "Secondary battery online," a sailor cried. Relief surged across the deck, shouts cracked with disbelief. But relief carried suspicion in its shadow. 3 times now. 3 times survival had hinged not on training, not on chain of command, but on her. From the bridge, Admiral Hale's eyes locked on her again. Not suspicion anymore, certainty. The intercom barked. Enemy range closing, visual contact in 10 minutes. Sailors sprinted to the rails, peering into the horizon, and there they were. Dark shapes cutting the sea, growing larger with every breath. Ships bristling with guns, slicing water with predatory intent. The Horizon adjusted course, presenting its broadsides. Turrets lifted, their barrels gleaming in harsh light. The enemy fired first. A thunderous boom split the air, black smoke curling from their decks. The shell arced skyward, screaming as it fell, slamming into the water 100 yards off the bow. Spray drenched the deck, sailors gasping as stung their eyes. "Return fire," Hale roared. The Horizon shuddered as its cannons belched flame. The recoil hammered through steel, shaking boots against the deck. Smoke rolled across the ship, choking the air, deafening in its fury. Lyra braced against the railing, her hair whipped by wind and spray. She watched trajectories with a sniper's eye. She could almost see the mathematics of destruction written in the sky. The gunners aimed well, but not well enough. Her instincts screamed corrections they could not see. She moved to the nearest fire control officer, her voice sharp. "Shift elevation 2 degrees. Starboard spread wider." The man blinked. "That's not in the fire plan." "Do it," she snapped. Something in her tone broke hesitation. He relayed the adjustment. The next volley thundered. Shells screamed across the waves, slamming closer, detonations forcing the lead enemy vessel to veer. Cheers rose. But they died quickly, drowned by the next barrage. More shells rained down. One slammed into the ocean so near the deck the spray knocked men to their knees. Lyra's blood thrummed. She had no weapon in hand, no insignia on her shoulder. Yet she was fighting all the same, guiding, correcting, bending the rhythm of war with nothing but her voice. Admiral Hale saw it. Even through smoke and chaos, he saw it. She wasn't just surviving, she was directing. And every man aboard was beginning to notice. The intercom blared again. Fast craft approaching, enemy boats inbound, closing on port side. Lyra's head snapped toward the spray and smoke. She saw them. Sleek attack boats slicing waves, mounted guns bristling. They were aiming to swarm to pierce the Horizon's defenses up close. The secondary batteries were turning, but the crews were green, rattled by the barrage. Their fire would scatter wasted. Without thinking, Lyra seized a headset from a frozen petty officer. Port gunners tightened spread. Aim for wakes, not hulls, heard them inward, collapse their formation. Her voice cut across the channel like a whip. The startled gunners obeyed. Fire erupted, shells hammering water around the incoming craft. Their wakes split, their formation unraveling. One boat veered straight into another's path. A collision, a blossom of fire. The crew erupted. A roar of victory surged across the deck. But Hale's face remained carved from stone, because he knew what they had seen. Once more she had spoken with authority no one had given her. Once more, survival had bent to her will. The battle raged on, steel against steel, fire against fire. The horizon groaned under each impact, smoke clawing at the sky. Sailors coughed, eyes stinging with salt and smoke, hands blistered from relentless loading. And amid the chaos, one truth spread faster than fire. Lyra Vance was not who she claimed to be. And with every command she gave, every correction that saved lives, the question grew louder. Who was she really? How long could a ship survive when its heart was breaking apart? The thought haunted every clang of steel, every shudder underfoot as the horizon braced against the storm. The battle was no longer distant thunder across the sea. It was here, close, merciless. Enemy shells rained down in steady rhythm, geysers erupting around the hull. The air tasted of salt and smoke, every breath a mix of fire and fear. Sailors shouted over the roar, loading shells, sealing breaches, dragging wounded away. The deck had become a furnace. Lyra gripped the railing, scanning the chaos. The mathematics of destruction unfolded before her eyes. Every trajectory, every angle, patterns that only years of invisible war could etch into a person. She saw where their shots fell short, where enemy vessels baited too wide. She called corrections without hesitation, her voice sharp, cutting through confusion like a blade. And the crew listened. Not because they were ordered to, but because they had already seen what happened when they didn't. She caught herself then, chest tightening. This wasn't what she wanted. She hadn't come here to command. She hadn't come here to lead. She had come here to disappear. But war didn't ask what you wanted. It only asked what you could bear. Turret jammed. A voice screamed from starboard. We've lost elevation control. The words split the air like a crack in steel. Hale's voice thundered from the bridge. Get it back online. Technicians scrambled to the turret housing, fumbling at controls, tools clattering against the deck. But Lyra had already seen the truth. The way the gun had frozen, hydraulics whining against a seized piston, it wasn't going to reset from the outside. Not in time. Her body moved before doubt could root her feet. She sprinted across the deck, dropping to the maintenance hatch. Smoke and heat rolled up at her. She slid inside without hesitation. The world closed into darkness, metal pressing on all sides. Sweat beaded instantly on her skin, dripping into her eyes. The sound inside was deafening, hydraulics straining, steel groaning, gears locked in protest. She crawled through the cramped passage, sparks flashing inches from her face. There the actuator jammed, the piston locked solid. She grabbed a lever, forced it down, metal shrieking under her grip. Her muscles burned. The piston resisted. With her other hand she jammed a wedge into the valve, redirecting pressure the way she had been taught in rooms the Navy swore didn't exist. The gun above shuddered, then moved, slowly at first, then locking back into place. Turret restored, a voice shouted from above. She shoved herself back through the hatch, coughing against the smoke, her body streaked with grease, her breath ragged. She emerged into sunlight just as the turret fired. The thunderclap shook her bones. For a heartbeat, the crew only stared. Not because she had saved the gun, but because of what it meant. No logistics clerk belonged inside that system. No supply hand knew how to rewire hydraulics blind. Yet she had done it, filthy but unshaken, her eyes steady. And that terrified them more than the shells. Hale watched from the bridge, his jaw clenched. His silence said more than any order could. He remembered the files. He remembered the day he had signed the order to erase Spectre Division, and he knew exactly what he was seeing now. Another barrage toward the sea, geysers hammering against the hull. One shell slammed into the superstructure, metal shrieking, smoke billowing skyward. Sailors stumbled, coughing, some dropping where they stood. Flames licked across twisted panels, threatening to spread. Lyra didn't hesitate. She seized a fire extinguisher, sprinted into the haze. Heat seared her face, smoke clawed at her throat. She pressed forward anyway, forcing the flames back until others joined her with hoses. Together, they drowned the fire, leaving only charred steel and the acrid taste of ruin. When she stepped out of the smoke, her jacket scorched, her face streaked with soot, the crew didn't look at her like they had before. They didn't see logistics anymore. They saw something else entirely. The intercom blared, dragging their eyes outward. Enemy fleet adjusting course, closing range. The horizon braced. Turrets rotated, cannons angled. Steel roared again as the ship answered fire with fire. The enemy pressed harder, shells hammering closer, geysers pounding the water like fists, and still she called corrections. Hold fire, wait for 200 yards, don't waste rounds. Her voice cut sharp, decisive. The chief gunner glanced at her, hesitation flickering. Then he relayed the command. When the next volley came, it landed squarely, tearing across the lead destroyer. Fire blossomed, smoke belched as the ship began to list. Cheers erupted, but this time they weren't cheers of luck, they were cheers of belief. And that was dangerous. Hale's gaze never left her. He could feel it happening, the shift. They weren't just listening, they were starting to follow her, starting to trust her more than him. Another shell slammed into the deck, throwing sailors to the ground. One slid dangerously close to the edge. Lyra lunged, catching his collar, yanking him back before the sea could swallow him. He gasped, dazed but alive. She shoved him toward cover, already scanning the horizon for the next threat. The loudspeaker cracked again. Fast craft closing, port side. Through the haze she saw them, sleek boats knifing the water, guns blazing. Too close, too fast. Without hesitation she seized a headset. Port gunners shift aim, low trajectory, hit the wakes, break formation. The crews obeyed, fire erupted. Shells hammered the waterline, tearing into the boats. One erupted in flames. The others scattered, their formation shattered. Sailors roared, adrenaline shaking their voices. But Hale's expression didn't change. His grip on the rail whitened, his jaw tight, because he knew what it meant. He had just watched her slip from survivor to commander in the eyes of the crew. The battle raged, smoke clawing at the sky, sea boiling under relentless fire. The horizon fought like a cornered beast, every gun bared, every sailor stretched to breaking. And at its heart stood a woman no one could place, a phantom given flesh. On the bridge, Hale's aide leaned closer. "Sir, the men are looking to her." Hale's eyes never left Lyra as she barked orders, her voice carrying sharper than the cannons. He whispered back, grim, "They see what I tried to bury." The aide swallowed. "What is she?" "Spectre Division," Hale said, his voice a blade. "She shouldn't be here. None of them should." Another blast hammered the bow, throwing them both to the rail. Hale steadied himself, then roared across the deck. "All batteries, concentrate fire. End this now." Lyra climbed back toward the gunners, lungs burning, her body bruised but unyielding. She leaned against the rail for only a moment, then lifted her voice once more. "Tight grouping on their lead ship. Break the spear, the rest will scatter." The gunners hesitated. Their eyes darted to Hale. The admiral's jaw clenched. Then with a sharp nod he gave the word, "Do as she says." The guns fired in brutal unison. Steel thundered, shells screaming across the sea. The lead enemy vessel shuddered, flames consuming its deck. Smoke curled high into the sky. The crew roared, wild and raw, their eyes blazing toward her. And for the first time, Admiral Hale felt something colder than fear. Not of the enemy, but of the woman who stood at the center of his deck, guiding his crew as though the command had already shifted hands. When the guns fell silent, the sea was no calmer. Smoke drifted in the wind, the scent of burning steel carried across the waves. Wreckage floated in patches, some flaming, some already sinking into the black depths. The horizon groaned, her deck, her hull dented, but still she stood. Survivors again. And once again because of her. Sailors stumbled across the deck, tending to wounds, dragging hoses across charred panels, securing loose cables. But beneath their exhaustion, beneath the soot and salt crusting their faces, their eyes carried something different now. Not just relief, not just survival. They looked to her. Lyra felt it as she moved among them. Stares clung like gravity. A sailor reached out as she passed, gripping her sleeve not to stop her but to steady himself, as though her presence alone could anchor him. Another muttered a quiet, "Ma'am," under his breath, not rank, not protocol, but reverence. And every one of those moments twisted inside her chest. She had tried to bury this, tried to vanish into quiet, into a nameless role where she could lift crates and fasten straps and never hear her own name again. But the sea had dragged her back into light, and the more she resisted, the brighter it burned. She turned away from their stares, focusing instead on the wreckage trailing in their wake. Enemy ships still smoldered, but none chased. For now, the battle was over. For now. Vance. Her name struck harder than a cannon. Admiral Hale stood at the deck's edge, his storm eyes fixed on her. He did not shout. He didn't need to. His voice cut sharper than steel even in its calm. "With me." She followed without a word. They descended into the ship's interior, the noise of the deck fading into the hum of engines. The corridor narrowed, bulkheads stained with soot, lights flickering overhead. Every turn felt more isolated until they reached the war room. The door sealed behind them with a hiss. Maps sprawled across the table, tactical feeds flickering on screens. Red dots marked hostile positions across the Mediterranean, more than Lyra expected. Too many. This wasn't a random encounter. Hale's aides stiffened when she entered, their eyes wide with the same unease she had seen in the crew. But Hale waved them out. The door sealed again. Now it was only the two of them. For a long moment, silence pressed between them. Only the low hum of electronics filled the room. Hale's gaze never left her. "You're forcing my hand," he said at last. His voice was low, measured, carrying the weight of years. Lyra met his stare, unflinching. "I didn't ask for your hand. I asked to be left alone." He slammed his palm against the table, the maps trembling under his grip. "Don't play that game with me. I know what you are. I know what that patch means." Her jaw tightened. "Then you also know I didn't want to be found." "You should have stayed buried," he snapped. His eyes burned, but beneath the fire was something heavier. Not anger, guilt. Lyra tilted her head, studying him. "You signed the order." The Admiral's breath caught, just for a second. "I read the files," she said quietly. "I know who erased us, who called us expendable when the missions were done." His eyes hardened. "You think you know, but you don't. That division was a nightmare, one I had to kill before it consumed everything around it." Lyra's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You didn't kill it. You buried the bodies and hoped the dirt would never shift." His jaw clenched, silence speaking louder than his words. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Tell me, Admiral, did you believe the reports that said none of us survived, or did you pray they were true?" The question cut deeper than any blade. For a moment his mask cracked, his eyes dropped, his breath uneven. "I prayed," he admitted softly, "because I knew if any of you lived, you'd never forgive me." Her chest tightened, the words like salt in an open wound. She wanted to scream, wanted to lash out, but all she could do was stand in silence, the ghosts pressing against her ribs. The console beeped, shattering the moment. A live feed flared on screen, distress signals, multiple, Allied vessels crippled across the sector, enemy signatures closing in waves. Hale straightened, his voice sharp again. They're not hunting us by chance. This is coordinated. Someone fed them our routes. Sabotage. The word didn't need to be spoken. Lyra's mind flashed back to the scorched relay, the jammed hydraulics. Not failure, precision. Too precise for luck. She drew a slow breath. You have a traitor on board. Hale's eyes flicked to her, hard, reluctant, but not denying. I'll find them, she said. No, his voice snapped like a whip. You've done enough. Her brows rose. Enough or too much? He didn't answer. His silence was answer enough. The ship's klaxon wailed suddenly, urgent and raw. Both their heads snapped to the intercom. Admiral, we've got movement, fast craft portside. And sir, something's wrong in the armory. The voice cracked with panic. Hale slammed the comms. Seal the armory, contain it. But Lyra was already moving. She didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for command. Her boots pounded against steel as she sprinted through the corridors, the Admiral's shouts fatting behind her. The smell hit first, smoke and cordite. Then the sound, gunfire, sharp, echoing in the narrow hall. The armory. She rounded the corner and froze for half a heartbeat. Sailors scattered, ducking for cover as muzzle flashes lit the doorway. A figure inside sprayed rounds wildly, the staccato beat of betrayal echoing off steel. A traitor. Her body moved before thought could anchor it. She lunged forward, slamming into the nearest sailor, dragging him clear as a bullet sparked off the bulkhead where he had been standing. She shoved him behind cover, then grabbed his sidearm without asking. The weight was familiar, too familiar. She crouched, breath steady, pulse slowing the way it always had in the past. Training buried deep, rising like a tide. One beat, two. She leaned into the doorway. The traitor whirled, eyes wild, rifle spitting fire. Lyra rolled low, shots ringing above her. She came up steady, aimed and fired. One shot, clean, precise. The figure collapsed, weapon clattering against steel. Silence fell, broken only by the ringing in their ears. Smoke drifted. The sailors stared, wide-eyed, their faces pale. Lyra lowered the pistol slowly. For a moment the weight of it dragged her hand down, heavier than any missile. She set it on the deck, her breath ragged. Boots thundered behind her. Hale burst into the corridor, eyes scanning the smoke and blood. His gaze locked on the fallen traitor, then on her. You, he whispered, more accusation than gratitude. Lyra met his stare, chest heaving. You wanted proof, there it is. The Admiral's jaw tightened, his eyes flickering between her, the weapon, and the corpse. He gave no praise, no thanks, only silence. But the sailors who had watched whispered in low voices, their eyes on her. Not fear this time, not suspicion. Something closer to faith. And that, Hale knew, was the most dangerous weapon aboard. How many times could one ship be broken from within before the sea itself finished the job? The thought pressed against Lyra's ribs as she stood over the fallen traitor, smoke still curling from the sidearm she had set down. The silence was heavier than the gunfire had been. Sailors stared at her, some with awe, some with unease, but none with doubt. They had seen her cross the line, not just repairs, not just guidance. She had fired. She had killed one of their own. Boots echoed behind her. Admiral Hale stepped into the corridor, his storm eyes sweeping across the scene. The body on the deck, the smoking muzzle of her sidearm, the faces of sailors who now looked at her as though she were gravity itself. He didn't speak thanks, he didn't speak praise, he only said, secure the body, sweep the armory, double locks on all munitions. The sailors moved quickly. their eyes darting back to her even as they obeyed. Lyra wiped soot from her cheek with the back of her hand. Her voice was low, calm, but sharp enough to cut. That wasn't random sabotage. That was coordinated. Hale's eyes narrowed, and you know that how. Her silence was enough of an answer. The Admiral stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. You don't get to lead this ship, not while I stand here. Her jaw tightened. Then lead it, but stop pretending you can do it blind. Their eyes locked, tension stretched taut as wire. For a breath, neither moved. Then the ship itself groaned beneath them, the sound of steel straining under impact. The intercom cracked with frantic voices. Admiral Engine Room reports breach, fire spreading. Hale spun on his heel, barking orders into the comms, but Lyra was already running. The corridors blurred around her, sailors pressing aside as she tore past. The heat hit first, smoke rolling thick, flames licking steel, alarms wailing in every direction. The engine room was a furnace, sailors coughing through masks, struggling with hoses too weak to quench the blaze. She didn't hesitate. She seized a mask from a frozen petty officer, yanked it on, and dove into the fire. The heat seared instantly, burning her arms through cloth, but she pressed forward, eyes squinting against the smoke. She saw the problem before anyone else did. Fuel lines cracked, fire racing along their length toward the main tanks. If they ignited, the ship wouldn't limp. It would vanish. Her chest clenched. No time for orders, no time for protocol. She dropped low, crawling beneath the smoke, every breath heavy with ash. She pulled a wrench from the wall rack, her fingers slick with sweat, and twisted the valve with all her strength. It barely budged. Her muscles screamed. She set her shoulder against it, teeth gritted. The heat clawed at her lungs, flames snapping at her sleeves. She felt the skin blister, but she forced the wrench harder. The valve screamed, then gave. Fuel stopped flowing. The fire lost its breath, shrinking back, hoses finally able to smother it. Sailors surged forward, drowning the flames until only smoke remained. Lyra collapsed against the bulkhead, mask askew, coughing violently. Her vision blurred, her chest heaving, her body shaking from the effort. Hands grabbed her shoulders, dragging her clear. Sailors pressed water to her lips, their voices frantic. You saved the whole damn ship. Again. We owe her everything. She shoved the canteen away, her throat raw. Their voices felt heavier than the smoke. Owe her everything. The weight of that terrified her more than the flames ever had. Boots pounded against steel. Hale stormed into the engine room, his face set like stone. His eyes found her immediately, crouched against the wall, soot-streaked and coughing. The sailors moved instinctively, some stepping between her and the Admiral without even realizing it, protecting her. Hale saw it, his jaw tightened. Clear this room, he barked. The sailors hesitated. Then, reluctantly, they obeyed, leaving her with him. The Admiral stared down at her, his voice sharp with steel. Do you see what you're doing? Every time you step in, they stop looking at me. They look at you. Lyra struggled to her feet, her breath still ragged. Then maybe give them something worth looking at. His eyes flashed. You think you can command. You think because you patched a few pipes and fired one shot you can lead this ship. You don't know what it takes. She stepped closer, her soot-streaked face inches from his. Her voice was quiet, steady. I know exactly what it takes, because I've carried it longer than you want to admit. He flinched just barely, but enough. She saw it, the guilt, the memory, the truth he carried like a stone in his chest. Before he could answer, the comms flared again. Admiral, multiple inbound signatures. It's another strike package. Hale grabbed the comms. All hands battle stations. He turned back to her, his eyes like knives. Stay out of my way. He stormed out. Lyra leaned against the bulkhead, her body trembling from smoke and exhaustion. Stay out of his way. She almost laughed. If she had stayed out of the way, they'd already be at the bottom of the sea. She dragged herself upright, forcing her legs to move. The alarms blared again, boots thundered above her, and the ship shook under the weight of new missiles streaking closer. When she emerged onto the deck, the crew turned instantly toward her, not hail her. And in that moment, Lyra felt the heaviest burden of all, not the fire, not the sabotage, not the ghosts of her past, but the knowledge that they had already chosen. Not because she wanted it, but because she left them no choice. How much longer could a single ship stand against the weight of a war it hadn't asked for? The question throbbed in Lyra's chest as alarms wailed again, their shrill pitch drilling into every nerve. The horizon groaned beneath her boots, the deck alive with panic and purpose. Multiple inbound missiles. The cry rang over the intercom, voices breaking with fear. Impact window 3 minutes. The horizon glowed faintly where the sky split open, contrails streaking like scars across the blue. They came fast, too fast, an entire swarm hunting one vessel. Sailors scrambled, loading batteries, tightening belts, dragging hoses, shouting over each other. But beneath their urgency was something else, desperation. They knew what Lyra knew. No ship could withstand this, not alone. Unless every shot counted. Unless someone forced order from chaos. Her lungs still burned from the engine fire, her skin raw, every muscle trembling, but her voice carried sharp, steady. Focus on outer spread first. Don't waste fire on the decoys. Prioritize angle of approach, 7s and 9s first. The gunners faltered, then obeyed. Flak erupted into the sky, shredding air with thunder. Explosions tore contrails apart, blossoms of smoke where missiles detonated midair. But too many remained. Hale's voice boomed from the bridge. Maintain fire, keep formation. Another volley streaked overhead. One slammed into the water near the port bow, geysers soaking the deck. Another clipped the radar mast, twisting steel into sparks. 2 minutes. Lyra's eyes tracked the swarm, instincts drawing patterns invisible to others. She saw the rhythm of the strike, the deceptive gaps, the way the enemy fed them bait. She grabbed the nearest fire control officer. Shift trajectory, starboard batteries, high elevation now. He hesitated, looked to the bridge. Then to her. He relayed the command. The guns fired, tearing into the sky. 2 missiles vaporized instantly, shockwaves hammering the deck. The crew roared, adrenaline flooding their veins. But the air screamed again. Dozens remained. And then came the voice that froze her blood. Admiral, forward interceptors offline. Circuits cut, looks deliberate. Sabotage again. Lyra's chest clenched. Whoever had died in the armory hadn't acted alone. There was more. The ship lurched under another impact, sailors thrown across the deck. Lyra slammed against the rail, pain sparking through her shoulder. She forced herself upright, scanning the forward defenses. Dark, dead. She knew what that meant. No interceptors, no chance, unless. Her feet moved before thought could catch them. She sprinted across the deck, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the shouts. She knew where to go. The maintenance hatch. Smoke rolled as she tore it open, crawling into the steel veins of the ship. The roar outside dimmed into the suffocating crush of pipes and cables. Her breaths came ragged, each movement agony, but she pressed on. She found it. The junction. Wires cut clean, circuits blackened with deliberate sabotage. She ripped open the panel, hands trembling as she twisted cables together, sparks burning her skin. The ship groaned, alarms screaming, missiles closing fast. Horizon, impact in 60 seconds. Her heart pounded, blood roaring in her ears. She knew she wouldn't finish in time, not all of it, not safely, but safety was no longer the point. She bit down hard, stripped insulation with her teeth, jammed wires together. A searing jolt shot through her, muscles spasming, vision flashing white. She screamed but didn't let go. The panel hummed, circuits flickering back to life. Systems rebooted, screens lighting across the bridge. Forward interceptors online. Her body shook, nerves aflame, breath shallow. She slumped against the steel, chest heaving, but forced her eyes open. Above, the interceptors roared, belching fire. Missiles exploded mid-air, shockwaves rattling the hull. One after another, blossoms of destruction lit the sky. The crew erupted in cheers, raw and desperate. They had been seconds from death. And she had dragged them back. But Lyra didn't hear the cheers. She only heard her pulse, ragged and uneven, her body slumping against steel. She had given too much again. Hands grabbed her, dragging her back through the hatch. Sailors pulled her onto the deck, her face pale, her breath shallow. "She's alive, get her water." She coughed, forcing her lungs to obey, forcing her eyes open. She saw their faces above her, smeared with soot, wild with relief. Not just sailors anymore, followers, believers. And standing apart, Admiral Hale. His face was carved from stone, but his eyes burned with something she couldn't name. Not hatred, not anger, something closer to fear. Because the truth was undeniable now. She had not only saved them, she had led them. And the crew no longer cared what rank she wore. The Admiral's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as steel. "All hands hold fire, prepare counterattack." The crew scrambled, but their eyes flickered back to her, even as they obeyed. That was the wound Hale could not heal. Lyra sat against the rail, every breath a struggle, but her voice still steady. "Break their formation. Don't chase the swarm. Aim for the carrier. Cut off the head, the body will fall." The chief gunner hesitated, then nodded. Orders relayed. Guns thundered again. Shells tore through the waves, slamming into the largest silhouette on the horizon. Fire erupted across its deck, smoke belching skyward. The smaller vessels faltered, their formation unraveling. The crew roared in victory, but it was Hale they turned to. It was her. Lyra closed her eyes, the sound washing over her. Not pride, not relief, only exhaustion. And a truth she could no longer outrun. No matter how much she wanted to disappear, no matter how deep she had tried to bury herself, the war had found her again. And it wasn't finished with her yet. When dawn came, it was not with triumph, it was with silence. The sea stretched calm now, its surface broken only by drifting wreckage and the faint smoke of dying fires. The horizon limped forward, her hull, her crew battered but afloat. Against every measure of logic, she had survived the night. Lyra stood at the railing, the early light painting her face in pale gold. Her uniform was torn, streaked with grease and ash, her body aching from burns and bruises. But her eyes remained steady, fixed on the horizon as though it alone held the answers she had never spoken aloud. The crew moved quietly across the deck, their voices hushed, their movements heavy. They were alive, yes, but they knew the cost. The dead lay wrapped in canvas, lined in silence near the aft rail. Sailors bowed their heads as they passed, their hands brushing the fabric as though to say goodbye without words. Lyra lingered at the edge, her hand resting on one of the shrouds. She hadn't known his name. She hadn't known half of theirs, but she had carried them if only for a night. And in that stillness, she felt the truth settle heavier than the smoke ever had. They weren't hers to carry. Yet she had, and she would again if the sea demanded it. "Vance." The voice was softer this time, not a bark, not an order, just a name. She turned. Admiral Hale stood a few paces away, his posture rigid but his face drawn, the lines of exhaustion etched deeper than steel. For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them was its own battlefield. Finally Hale drew a slow breath. "They're saying you saved this ship, twice, maybe 3 times." Her eyes flicked to him, steady. "I didn't do it for them to say it." "I know." His gaze dropped, fixed on the deck. "That's what makes it worse." The admission hung there, raw and unguarded. She waited, her chest tightening, until he finally looked at her again. His eyes were tired, storm-softened by something closer to surrender. "I buried you once," he said quietly. "Buried all of you, because I thought it was mercy, because I couldn't carry what we'd done. I told myself it was the only way." Lyra's jaw tightened. "And when we crawled out of that dirt, when we tried to breathe again, what then?" His throat worked. "I prayed you wouldn't, because I knew if you lived, I'd have to face this moment. The moment when you stood in front of me and I had no defense left." Her breath caught, anger and grief twisting inside her. She wanted to spit venom, to curse him for the years stolen, the names erased, the lives discarded. But when she opened her mouth, only one question came, soft, barely a whisper. "Why me?" Hale blinked. "Why did you look at that patch," she pressed, "and see only a mistake? Why couldn't you see the person under it?" The Admiral's jaw clenched. His eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "Because if I saw the person, I couldn't live with myself." The words sliced deeper than anger ever could. For a long moment, the two of them stood in silence, the weight of ghosts pressing heavy on the dawn. Then the intercom crackled, breaking the spell. "Admiral Command requests immediate status report. Satellite confirms enemy fleet pulling back. Orders." Hale reached for the comms, his hand pausing just above the switch. His eyes lingered on Lyra. Then with a slow exhale he pressed the button. His voice carried steady, practiced. "This is the Horizon. We remain afloat. Casualties sustained. Enemy retreat confirmed." A pause, then softer, "And for the record, survival credited to crew initiative, against all odds." He released the switch, the words echoing in the room. Lyra tilted her head. Crew initiative. It wasn't her name, it wasn't recognition, but it was something. Hale's eyes met hers again. "They'll never give you what you deserve, not the Navy, not command, but I can give you this." He gestured faintly toward the deck, toward the sailors who now glanced at her with reverence. "You've already taken what matters most, their trust, their belief." Her chest tightened, the words both comfort and burden. She looked away, back toward the horizon, her hand tightening on the railing. "I didn't want it," she said softly. "I know. But they'll keep looking to me, and she swallowed. "I don't know if I can carry it again." Hale's voice dropped, almost gentle. "Sometimes the weight isn't ours to choose, only ours to bear." The words lingered in the morning air, heavy with truth. Lyra closed her eyes, breathing deep, the salt air sharp against her lungs. For a heartbeat, she saw the faces of the fallen, the ghosts of Spectre Division, the sailors she had dragged from fire and steel, the ones who now whispered her name in silence. When she opened her eyes, the sea stretched endless, unforgiving, eternal. She turned from Hale, from the crew, from the weight of their stares, and walked back toward the rail. The morning sun lit her face, catching the faint outline of the patch on her shoulder, the one she had never torn away, no matter how hard she had tried to disappear. And as the ship pressed onward through calm waters, her silence spoke louder than any medal, any report, any praise. Because sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.